Catherine, how many people are at the Gym of the Hills?
I don't know if anybody can hear me.
Yes, Judge, I just saw your message.
I can hear you now.
Great.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure. I couldn't hear anybody, and I just want to make sure that wasn't just me.
And what else can I say? Oh, so Milan, our first speaker, has just stepped out of a hearing. Oh, I'm going to actually use the chat for this. I will be right with you.
Cliff, we have 21 people who have logged in so far.
All right. Let's see, are those on the Zoom ready to get started?
Yes, we are.
Well, it might be good to give it another 2 minutes if we can, Catherine.
Okay, great. We're still waiting for Milan.
Yes.
Great. All right, well, we're gonna hang tight here in Blanco for 2 more minutes before we officially kick off. We're waiting for one of our keynote speakers who was at the Capitol today testifying on some legislation that ended up getting delayed. So he's just walking out of the Capitol. So we will wait for that. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. They can be really quiet. Yeah. We really quieted down. That's good. How many Zoom participants do we have? Do we have a number? 32.
32, we probably got 20 in here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe a little more.
Okay, Cliff, I want to check in with you. I'm thinking about kicking things off here in Blanco and giving Milan a little bit of time until we get to his presentation. Does that work?
Yeah, I'm gonna call him right now.
Great. All right, let's kick things off. Thank you all so much for joining us here at Gem of the Hills in Blanco. And for those who are Zooming in, my name is Catherine Romans. I'm the Executive Director of the Hill Country Alliance. And so we're very, very glad to be partnering with Protect Our Blanco to host this information session tonight. I want to start by thanking you all for your patience with us. This is our first foyer into kind of the mixed in-person, socially distanced event combined with the live Zoom feature. And so I really appreciate your patience with us as we grapple with the technology and the internet and trying to do an event that is interactive both for the folks in the room and the folks that are joining us remotely via Zoom. So thank you in advance for that. We have lined out a really, I think, informative and helpful group of experts on the issue of special districts. So MUDs and WCIDs are the first two that come to mind for tonight. I want to throw a big caveat, though, that this is a very complicated issue. And if anyone came tonight with the expectations that all of your questions would be answered, I'm sorry to say, we in all likelihood will not answer every question. We may find more questions that need answering after tonight's session, but we hope that with the expertise of our panelists, that you will feel empowered to understand the rough outline of the process for these special districts and how you as citizens of the Hill Country can feel empowered to kind of have an influence over that conversation. I want to make a couple of quick housekeeping logistical comments for those that are here live in person in Blanco. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight, for making the drive. We set up a registration, a sign-in sheet in the back of the room. And this goes for those folks who are signing on online as well. If you heard about this from a neighbor or a friend or word of mouth through a newspaper ad and not through direct communication from either the Hill Country Alliance or Protect Our Blanco, that in all likelihood means that you are not signed up on our email list. So if you're interested in staying kind of tuned in to these issues, I would encourage you to go on online to visit hillcountryalliance.org and Protect Our Blanco. I'm going to put Ann on the spot here, even though she's off screen, to share Protect Our Blanco's website so that you all can sign up for email alerts for this kind of events and other issues that are happening in our region. So Ann, I'm putting a pin for you to share Protect Our Blanco's website with us all. Here in Blanco, in the back of the room, we've got some great resources for you. I brought a little information sheet about the Hill Country Alliance, about what we do and how we do it. This is our issue paper on MUDs, WCIDs, and Hill Country water supply. So this is going to be a great introduction, a really easy to digest 4-page introduction into what MUDs are and how they work in the state of Texas. Milan Michalec, who is our very first speaker, actually wrote this paper for us when he was on the board of directors for the Hill Country Alliance. So this is a great primer. As you're leaving, feel free to pick this up. I've got some 2021 Hill Country calendars. you maybe already have your calendar for 2021 since it's already April, but I would encourage you to pick up a calendar. We usually sell these, so if you want to make a little donation, that would be great, but we've got some on the back table there. I also want to encourage for those who are just getting here to pick up some index cards. Connie is in the back of the room, standing up with index cards in her hand in order to make it easy for the folks on Zoom to hear all of the questions that are asked and answered tonight. I will be kind of doing the presenting of the questions. So I've already got one. Feel free at any point tonight to walk on up and drop off your question. We do not need to sit formally for this entire event. Let's see, on timing, Cliff is going to walk us through the agenda, but in all likelihood, we are going to run a little bit late. We're already getting a late start and we've jam-packed quite a few really wonderful speakers for you. So what we're going to do to save time is hold questions until the end of the event so that we can get them all out and have the full expertise of all of our panelists to be reflecting on questions. If you have questions and you are on Zoom, feel free to drop those in the Q&A function. So there at the bottom of your screen, you should see a couple of buttons, including one that says Q&A. That is where you can type in your questions, and I will be sure once we get to Q&A that I'm checking both the Zoom and in-person questions. Let's see, any other logistical items? Well, I want to actually take a moment to thank our elected officials who are here tonight. So to my right, and perhaps on the screen to your left, I have Council Member Dita Devine from the city of Blanco. Thank you very much, Council Member, for being here and for serving on this panel. And of course, in the audience here, I don't have the ability to turn the camera all the way around, but we have Council Member Keith McClellan. So thank you for being here tonight, Council Member. We really appreciate it. All right. With that, I'm going to touch base with Cliff, who is on Zoom, and see if, Cliff, you're ready to kind of walk us through the agenda for tonight.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So welcome, everybody, and thanks again for being here. Let me move forward. So the agenda is pretty straightforward. We have, if I can get these slides to advance, we have a simple objective which is to get more informed about MUDs and WCIDs and special districts.
And Cliff,
yeah.
Just for the folks in the room, we are relying on just one speaker. And so for the folks in the room, if you're having trouble hearing, feel free to move forward. And Cliff and all of our speakers, I would just ask that you really speak loudly and clearly close to the microphones so that we can hear you.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we have a pretty straightforward objective for the night, which is to get more informed about MUDs and WCIDs, why they matter, why they should matter to our communities, and what we can do to accentuate the positives and the opportunities associated with special districts like MUDs, and what we can do to minimize the negatives. And that's, whether you're a resident of the community or in the official municipal capacity, what can we do? So the agenda, we might have to scramble and rearrange slightly because, as Catherine said, our very first speaker, Milan Michalec, is having trouble connecting with us as he's just stepped out of the Capitol unexpectedly in a big agenda mix-up for the day. So we're going to hear from Milan at some point about sort of some of the nuts and bolts of MUDs and WCIDs. We're going to get an update from Council Member Dita Devine on the status with Blanco County, with Blanco MUD number 1. Then we will hear from Lauren Ice, who is an attorney who works with Protect Our Blanco and has some information to share with us about best practices and approaches that communities can take to navigating the pros and cons of MUDs when they approach our communities. And we'll hear also from Judge Kirsten Cahoon, who is the district attorney in Kendall County, excuse me, the district judge in Kendall County, and was the city attorney for the city of Bernie. And she's going to tell us about her experience there when the Esperanza mud was developed there. We're going to save questions and answers till the end so that we can make sure we get all of the information we can, and then ask questions at that point, and then we'll wrap up. So with that, I may suggest that we go actually first to Councilmember Devine to hear an update on the status of the Blanco mud.
Great.
Sounds good. Here we go.
Okay. Thanks everybody for being here. I don't have a huge update. The mud that is being proposed is near the intersection of 281 and 32. It's called the Blanco Mud number 1, which should tell you something about what comes after number 1. We have entered into what is called a consent agreement with the mud developers. This is something that the city could have denied consent to the creation of the mud. However, they also have the option to go directly to TCEQ if we deny consent, and to the Texas legislature to also ask for consent to create the mud. So there's some negotiating capabilities that we have in either direction, but the consent was given to create the mud. So that's the first step. The steps that will follow is there's what's called a development agreement between the mud and the city. And that will involve, setting limitations on density, wastewater, water delivery, that kind of stuff will come in what's called the development agreement and the strategic partnership. And those are the places where the city is going to have some negotiating power. The map that you saw a second ago up here, I don't know if they can bring it back up.
Yeah, Cliff, can you bring up the original screen again? Thanks.
This was what they called the preliminary plat map for the mud number 1. They didn't bring it in when they originally asked. I asked them if they had brought anything like that, and they said no. And then 15 minutes later, they were able to produce the preliminary plat map for me to see. And as you can see, it's very, very, very dense. That's a lot of houses we're looking at. It's just under 1,000 new taps right on the edge of our city. So we've got our work cut out for us. That's really all the update I have about it. I'm really looking forward to Milan speaking because he's really done the work on these for the last 10 years out in Kendall County, and he does sit on that groundwater conservation district board. So he's really, in my view, of all the people I've talked to about this, he really has the most broad information about it. So hopefully he'll be able to get to a phone where we can hear from him pretty soon. But that's really all I have for you.
All right, since Cliff is, I think, trying to wrangle up Milan, who is probably in the basement of the Capitol right now without cell phone service. Lauren, I wanted to see if you would be ready to talk a little bit about your experience with MUDs and your recommendations for how community members can be involved in the process.
If I can interrupt for a second, I apologize, everybody. We're going to see what kind of fix we can wrangle here. Can I just ask if this is discernible to y'all? Milan, say hello. Hello. Probably not. One more try, Milan. Milan, can you say? Is that discernible in the house at all?
Can you guys in the back hear Milan? No, it's not loud enough.
All right, we're gonna keep working on it.
Okay, Lauren, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I am an attorney with the firm Paralis, Allman and Ice. We are a pro plaintiff side environmental attorney, meaning we do public interest environmental law. We only represent community groups or neighbors or landowners who are opposing permits that would allow for pollution. And so, and I am representing Protect Our Blanco right now regarding the wastewater matter that's going on in the city. And I bring that up. It's an ongoing issue. It's somewhat related to the mud, and it's kind of how I learned about the mud and what was going on with the mud. But I'm not here to speak directly on that topic. I'm here more to speak about sort of the public participation opportunities when these muds present themselves to communities, and sort of what the communities can do, as Cliff said earlier, to respond to the mud and sort of get the best out of a bad situation a lot of times. So, you know, I can probably anticipate what Milan will say. A lot of what I was going to say will need to sort of build on that, but I think that what you will likely hear from Milan is about how these muds were maybe originally designed to help provide water to rural areas in Texas, and have since sort of expanded to have a lot of power to provide a lot of public infrastructure through their bonding capacity. And so they're essentially like they operate like these little cities or towns, oftentimes right on the outskirts of existing cities or towns, and with less sort of control or opportunity for the public to participate, for democracy to really work by representation. And so there's a lot of concern that they're putting a strain on the existing communities. And you know, and a lot of times these muds end up being annexed sometime in the future. And so if the city, you know, hasn't planned really well for them and for the infrastructure that they're going to provide, then they're looking at costs and strain and, you know, environmental problems that the city's going to have to deal with. And so I think that's where a lot of the concerns that folks in Blanco are hearing about this mud, where those are coming from. So in my mind, there's sort of two big categories when we're talking about the issues that concerns with muds, especially in the Texas Hill Country. There's sort of the usual development related concerns, because you're talking about a really large area typically that has high density development, which is just like what Councilmember Devine just showed. And so we're looking at concerns related to water quality or other environmental protections. But we're also, as I was kind of alluding to, looking to the impact that the city might see in the years to come, and that the current taxpayers in the city might have to make up for in the years to come, since most often these muds that are in the ETJs are eventually annexed by the city. Even if they're not annexed, they oftentimes rely really heavily on the city's resources, which is something I do want to talk about, but particularly with wastewater and water extensions. So I think one thing that the community in Blanco saw with the petition for the Blanco mud number 1 is the lack of sort of preparedness to deal with a mud petition like this. That's not uncommon, I would say, in small towns, and there hasn't been a mud like this proposed. So this really highlighted, I think, the need for the city to adopt its own mud policy. And I understand that that's in the works. I understand that's something that community members have already been asking for. But what a mud policy could do is establish the procedures, for one, that the mud consent petition would have to go through, such as requiring a pre-meeting with the city, such as requiring a public hearing so the public could come and testify, or requiring consideration by a certain city commission. It could also require certain information be provided by the petitioner. So Councilmember Devine mentioned that it was a bit challenging to get the information that they needed, or to know what they were really looking at. If that was in the policy, that policy is public, it's predictable, and the developer knows exactly what they need to provide to the city when they apply. And then of course it would sort of give a process to make the decision, and it would help empower our city council members and our community to know what they can ask for as conditions of their consent, if they were to give that consent, And so it just provides a better transparent process for everyone to follow. The MUD policy could also, include substantive conditions, maybe minimum conditions that the city would need for the MUD to meet in order to grant their consent. So while they've already granted consent for this MUD, I would say this is important, of course, for future MUDs, but also if this MUD wanted to expand in the future into other areas inside the ETJ, or it wanted to amend its consent agreement, or in the future, maybe its development agreement, or make any kind of change like that, then this MUD policy would also help to guide those kinds of amendments. So there's also, of course, things people can still do, even though the MUD has given, or even though the city has given the MUD consent. So the city gave conditional consent. It, as Councilmember Devine said, it didn't negotiate a full development agreement yet, or a real complex consent agreement up front. So they required that the developer will prepare their plans and their infrastructure in compliance with the city's plans and specifications, and that the city will have the authority to review those. And so we're talking about extending public water or extending wastewater, providing drainage infrastructure and designing road infrastructure, that's got to meet city code. And that when those negotiations take place later, there will most likely be an opportunity for public participation in that process, particularly with extending water and wastewater infrastructure. And when I read the developer's petition and the city's consent, it seems like water and wastewater are kind of still on the table. The developer didn't necessarily say that they would rely on the city services, but it seems to be based off of their extremely dense preliminary plat that's what they want to do. So that's an opportunity for the city to negotiate. That's an opportunity for the public to play a role in the future. And then I'll just close with two other sort of opportunities. The MUD still has to go to TCQ to get their approval. So they have to submit their petition to TCQ. When they do that, they have to publish notice once a week for 2 consecutive weeks in a local paper. And then within 30 days of final publication, there's an opportunity for public comment and an opportunity for affected persons to request a contested case hearing. So for example, a property owner who owns property even outside of the district, but who is impacted in a way not similar to the general public, may be an affected person and may ask for a hearing to look closer at what the MUD is proposing. The city could certainly be an affected person if when they submit their petition to TCQ, they're going to have to include a certified copy of the city's written consent and evidence that their application conforms to the city's consent. So if it does not, then the city's got an opportunity there also to request a hearing. And then if the TCQ determines that hearing is necessary, then they'll conduct a hearing and get into the evidence of the petition, of the sufficiency of the petition and whether the project's feasible. And then the last point I want to make, or the last opportunity for public participation, is if the MUD does not hook up to the city's wastewater, then they will have to provide wastewater of their own. And that is another permitting process that will have to go through the TCQ in a similar manner. If there are neighboring landowners or landowners in the vicinity who are affected persons, there will be an opportunity for public comment on something like that, another opportunity for a public hearing, and the city could also submit comments and request a hearing if they were impacted. So there's probably many other ways for the public to participate, but those are the big ones that I sort of identified. And I'll leave it at that, and we can circle back to questions maybe later.
Great, thank you so much, Lauren. That's very helpful. I'm going to turn now to Judge Cocoon. Thank you so much. You have direct experience in working with a MUD that came into fruition. I'm looking forward to hearing about what the community of Bernie did. Oh, and I think you're on mute still.
happens to me every time. I know that Lauren probably spends half of her life too saying, "You're muted." You're muted.
Awesome.
I've been wanting one of those coffee cups. I'm Kirsten Cahoon. I'm the district judge for the 451st District Court that encompasses Kendall County, and we hear all of Kendall County. And I was asked by Cliff to come on today and talk about our experience, and not obviously as what I do now, but what I did during my time period with the city of Bernie as their city attorney. In 2008,
If you could speak as close to your microphone as
I don't
possible,
know
just so
where
here
my
in the
mic.
room we can
Okay,
hear
thank you.
Thank
I
you.
will just try and speak loud. Is that better?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. So in
And y'all are
2000,
welcome to move forward.
I came on to the city of Bernie as their first city attorney in 2010. When I came on to the city of Bernie, the development agreement for Esperanza had already been inked, the initial development agreement. It was entered into between the city and MA Bernie Partners Limited in 2008. And then I don't think if everybody can go back into their time machine, in 2000, shortly thereafter in 2010, we hit that big recession. That's about the time that I moved to Bernie. Shortly after that recession, the MA Bernie Partners went under, and that property, that 1,250 acre feet, or the property itself came under foreclosure. And underneath that original development agreement, I want to kind of hit on the highlights. MA Bernie Partners had received 1,250 acre feet of rights to 1,250 acre feet of water. Underneath that agreement, MA Bernie Partners agreed to give that water to the city of Bernie, so that then the city of Bernie would provide water service to Esperanza that was clearly being developed outside of its city limits. Additionally, they agreed to pay up to $8 million towards expansion of the wastewater treatment plant, and then that the city of Bernie would also do the wastewater. They were going to pay $2.3 million towards the expansion of Herf Road. I don't know how many of our viewers are new to the Hill Country area and don't remember what Bernie was like before we had the Herf Road extension, but that roadway was desperately needed. It also pledged to donate land to BISD for a school and for a park and an eventual fire station. All of those concessions in 2008, and if anybody remembers, it was hotly contested, eventually enabled that development agreement to pass. It was going to have 2,480 residences, 40 acres of commercial sites. So when it foreclosed, which was in 2013, the Lookout Group, which was a Houston firm, bought it on the courthouse steps, and we were there at the purchase. And that was after I had become city attorney. They acquired the 1,240 acres, which, if everybody's familiar with where this is, it was in it's off of 46, just east of Bernie. The Bernie city limits now is right on the border and across the street now. It sold at foreclosure for about $14.5 million, and the city argued vehemently that agreement was binding with the land. Whether or not, the Lookout Group agreed, we ended up working very well together. And over the course of the years, the city partnered with the Lookout Group. We worked through several reiterations of that development agreement. We changed some of the, sewer payments to an upfront sewer payment. One of the benefits we got was a payment per home at the sale. that would go into the ability to, you know, for libraries and parks and all the stuff that we knew that these that the people moving into the Esperance development would be like a Bernie citizen, but they weren't going to be paying the Bernie taxes. They'd be paying the taxes for the WCID, which I might sometimes call a wicked, which is what we call the
Judge, we're losing you just a little bit. If
Okay,
you could
I'm
keep
sorry.
speaking
I'm
up.
getting too. I'm going down and getting softer. My apologies. So I'm back up. So thank you. And we then in 2014, I'm just kind of giving an overview of this. They began receiving approval for the plats. So the process was 2018, the initial, then 2013 with the Lookout Group, and we began working through those plats as fast as 2014. I believe that the city worked well with the Lookout Group, and I actually was looking at some of the old newspaper articles, and the Lookout Group said that the city was firm but fair, and that we really maintained that original development agreement. We additionally, not only did we get we agreed to serve the development, the water, but we got to keep that acre feet of water that they had received. We agreed to serve them with the sewer, but in exchange, through the reiterations, they became our first treated affluent city customer, which in effect extended the city's supply of potable water. It's estimated at total build out that about 240 million gallons of reclaimed water will be needed there annually for irrigation. And that's going to come from the city's affluent system instead of out of the potable water that it originally would have. We began building the homes, and it actually began to be built in 2016. The number of lots had increased over the years, and the reiterations of the DA, of the development agreement, to more than about 5,200 lots, which included residential, retail, commercial sites. Additionally, that 2016, we had the last that I know of that I can remember DA, which allowed the developer to replace some homes with a higher density housing, including condos and apartments and cluster homes. I think what is the biggest bonus for this, and the reason why we were able to get what we got, was it was the first time that the city of Bernie had agreed to serve outside of its city limits, service of water and sewer, the utility service. And so through the years, we just didn't do that. And so this was the concessions to get that service. So I'd be happy to take a lot of questions on it, but I believe over the reiterations and the hard work between the city council members, it was a lot of packed meetings, a lot of hard work, a lot of negotiations over the course of 8 years, from 2008 to 2016 when it actually started to be built. And we actually did another reiteration of that DA in 2016. A lot of hard work, but it's a thriving development off of the outskirts of the city of Bernie. And it increases the amount of potable water for the city of Bernie because we were able to get that acre allotment. And it increased the potable water also by kicking off our wastewater system with our affluent water, which is in essence the city's another source of water for the city. So other developments can get purple pipe to the irrigation, which is great. so we were able to make some lemonade out of the lemons in the long run, but it took a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of packed city council meetings, a lot of concerned citizens. But I think if you went back and you talked to people, that they would forget about the concern that we had, particularly the 2008 when it was beginning, and see them as a good neighbor now for the city. I've been out of this. I took this position in January of 2019. So my last month with the city was December of 2018. I haven't really been involved of what's transpired since then, but before I left, they were a good partner at that time. And I think it's a good development. And I believe they've given to that road. They did end up giving all of those were given. We now have a very new school, elementary school, that was built on there. There is talks for the annex site for the fire station. And we did push back the annexation. Lauren, you were talking about the annexation, and that was part of the initial DA. The annexation was set to begin in 2022, and that was extended out to 15 years from each section's development. So it's a significant while. Maybe by the time I have grandchildren, you could start seeing it be annexed. But I'm hoping that's a long time from now with my 13 and 15-year-old kids. So it will be a while. But I do believe that will actually happen as well. But I'd be happy to take questions about that development agreement, and to the extent that I can answer them, I will. And to the extent that I can't, I'll get Cliff the answer.
Great, thank you, Judge. And if you could, Lauren spoke very briefly to the different ways that MUDs can be approved. We can have them through the TCEQ, they can come through the legislature, and they can come through this consent agreement. Can you tell us just kind of which route the Esperanza development took?
Well, we provided our consent. That was the exchange for that development agreement. So it was a consent.
Great, okay, so very analogous to what we're seing in Blanco.
Catherine? I
Yes.
apologize. Go
Oh,
ahead.
please.
Please, Judge, go ahead.
No, I was done. It was like Cliff and I had talked about. It was a consent, and because it was the first time the city of Bernie had ever offered to do utilities outside of its borders, we were able to have that argument. And they had that acre feet of water. They just didn't have the means and the methods of which to distribute the water and the sewer utility, right? And we had the means and the method to be able, and when I say we, I obviously mean the city, because like you always call your client, right, Lauren, we, and that's just kind of the vernacular I use. But we had the means and the method to do that. And so when they went to the foreclosure, that was kind of the carrot, right? And so, well, if you want us to do this, that's what we need.
All right. Okay, Cliff, I'm going to see if you have worked some magic to bring Milan into the conversation.
I'm doing my best. Let's see how this works. Milan, can you say hi to everybody?
Hello, everybody, and my sincere apologies for being at the Capitol trying to testify on a bill and pull this off at the same time.
Thank you, Milan. Is that audible in the house?
How are we feeling? Do folks in the back want to move? Okay, I think we're going to make that work.
Okay, good. Well, then with that, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen with Milan's slides. Are y'all seeing those in the house?
Yes, and if you could just keep on having Milan speak as loudly and clearly as he can, that'd be great.
Milan, as loud and clear as you can. We're looking at your home slide, MUDs and WCIDs, and introduction. Take it away.
On the introduction slide, I just want to stress that the information I'm going to give is from public information sources, and they're my personal views.
Thanks, Milan.
Overview.
Go ahead.
There are several areas I want to cover, specifically what's a MUD or WCID, how they are created, focus on public notice, touch on Kendall County experience, although I just heard something from the judge, and lastly, water concerns. Next chart should be MUDs and WCIDs are.
Please.
They are a category of special purpose government. The most common examples are independent school districts, emergency services districts, and curiously enough, where I serve, on a groundwater conservation district. The prevailing theme, as you've probably figured out, is that the government that you're seeing here with these special purpose districts is very difficult to get to the bottom of. There's a hyperlink, actually a web link to a Dallas story that was featured in a Texas Senate paper on special purpose districts. And the paper specifically referred to something called invisible governments. So I assume that Cliff will be able to post these for you all to look at. You could copy that URL and it'll take you directly to the paper.
Very good. We've gone to the next slide. Invisible government.
A wonderful source I found years ago was the Dallas Morning News. If you look at the bottom of the chart, the source gives the date and the title of the article. And rather than read through these two paragraphs, you could look at them and get the idea why they term this invisible government or government by developer.
Thanks. Moving
Next
forward.
chart, please.
Go ahead.
What is a MUD? I would remind everybody that they do have a purpose. You can see it. It's provide services such as a sewer, water, and drainage where city or county services are not available. Now, it maybe sound obvious, but MUDs can also fund parks, street lighting, and some roads and fire prevention facilities. The key point to take away, and you may already know this, MUDs are built in phases. For example, MUD number 1 may be split into sister districts like MUD number 1A, B, or C. Each one of those increments, the developer is refunded his investment or her investment from the sale of tax-exempt bonds. That's to build the infrastructure. And then the people that live in the boundaries of the district will pay property tax to pay off the bonds. It's typically about anywhere from $1.50 to $2.50 per $100. But there is no limit. It could be more. An example, as we've been talking this evening, is Blanco County MUD number 1. Next chart. What is a WCID?
And Milan, I think you can go a little bit faster. We appreciate that you're going slow, so that for clarity, so that folks can understand what you're saying. I think you can move a little bit faster.
No problem. So the point to take away is that the WCID is comparable to a MUD, but it's limited strictly to water control and improvement. It also has infrastructure that's built in phases, and each phase is funded by the developer, who also, like the MUD, is reimbursed from tax-exempt bonds. And one of the best examples I can give you in Kendall County is the first WCID, which was created in 1946. It is in an unincorporated area of the county. That means there's no city government. So the district at that point only provided water and sewer for people that lived in the area, not a subdivision per se. Next chart. Who creates MUDs and WCIDs? They can be created three ways. First, by the County Commissioners Court, by petition, by special law of the legislature, like I saw today, and that requires public notification in a paper, or the TCEQ can create these districts. And as you may have heard, even if a city denies consent, they can be created through the TCEQ, even if it's denied. Next chart, steps of MUD creation. This is a bit of an eye chart, but if you could get the gist of it by looking at the steps 1 through 10. And I want to draw your attention down to the center of the chart. At the bottom was 3 guys in suits. You'll notice that the law firm that they use here is Allen, Boone, Humphreys, and Robinson. I want you to remember that. So this is a chart you can go through at your leisure, and you can get an idea how these districts are created, and recognize that there's a tremendous amount of legal support, financial support, professional management. In other words, it costs a lot of money to run a MUD. Next chart, please. Mathews Ranch, WCID number 1. This is an example of how the public is notified when a WCID or MUD is to be created in the legislature. When you glance at this, I want you to tell me exactly where this piece of property is. And I would tell you, you can't find out unless you work for the appraisal district. Next chart, please. Mathews Ranch, WCID number 1. This is what it looks like on the appraisal district to satisfy the public notification process. It's probably still difficult to tell where it is. The top left-hand corner is Johnson City. The bottom right-hand corner is Henley, in small letters, Henley. Next chart, please.
Milan, I'm gonna ask you.
If you,
We did get a question that's specifically to the judge, and I know that she's gonna have to sign off in a moment. I wanted to make sure that we could get that question addressed. So I know it's a little bit of a disjunct, but I'm gonna take that liberty.
Sorry, Milan.
Judge,
Can you speak up, Cliff?
Judge, the question is, what is the best advice that you would give to the city of Blanco and the city's attorney toward negotiating best case water supply and wastewater agreements for the city with Blanco's MUD number 1? The majority of the MUD is in the city's ETJ. So what is the best advice you would give for negotiating water supply and wastewater agreements?
Well, I guess the best advice was to stand firm to what your ideals are in your city. We and Bernie were pretty firm about not providing service outside of our city limits. And so since we were really firm with that, we were able to demand some extra concessions. Additionally, we had the ability that they didn't have. And so it was really a partnership because we had something that they needed. And so we said, well, what do you have that we need at that time? And so that would be a partnership, right? And so I would go and I would say, okay, well, what do they have that we don't, that we can then go in there and say, okay, and what do we have that they don't? And try and see if there's that relationship. I unfortunately am not real knowledgeable on how Blanco was going to serve and what they have and what they couldn't need. So I'm leaning on what City of Bernie did because I know what City of Bernie generally does. So stand firm to what you generally do, but no, if you can get to where your constituents and your city is benefited, then that's a great place to be. But you need to find out what they have that could benefit you all, because it is going to be a lot of extra people driving on the roads, and a lot of extra people going to your library, and a lot of extra people drinking the water, and flushing the toilets. So how can we all live harmoniously and not one take extra from another, like a good relationship? Because that's exactly what you're entering into, is a relationship, a marriage of some sorts. I hope that helped.
Thank you, Judge.
I also have a question for the judge, if she has another minute.
Sure.
I'm just wondering, when the city of Bernie gave consent, did they already have a development agreement in place? Did the developers come with what did they bring when they asked for consent, I guess? Because in our case, they brought mostly nothing.
1,200 acre feet of water.
Uh-huh.
That was a big deal at that time. I remember that happened in 2008. So, and no, they came with this, here's what we have. Would you serve us? And can we do the WCID? And they worked through some other issues of what that would look like, to answer that question. They came asking for consent. And, okay. But I'm gonna say that the world was, I told this to Cliff when he called me, the world was different in 2008. That was 13 years ago. So what is that? Milan, what is that? 6 legislative sessions ago. And a lot has changed to MUD and WCID legislation and since then. So it was a relationship that we were able to do, and that they came to us asking for that consent and saying, here's what we have and what can we give you and what do you need? And it still worked through the foreclosure.
Right.
I hope
Thank you.
That helped and answered your question.
Yeah, thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge.
I'm gonna pop out.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Judge.
Milan, back to you. I think you were just about to address the location of the Mathews Ranch WCID in Blanco County, and we have that slide up.
I can barely hear Cliff.
Milan?
Okay, so we're back to the Mathews Ranch WCID. And the image to the left of the chart, it's difficult to tell, but the blue area is the WCID. Top left is Johnson City. Bottom right is Headley. This goes back to, it's very difficult for the public to understand where these things are, if you even know they are on being created. Next chart. Should be recognized this law firm.
Yep.
So if I go back, if you think back a couple charts ago when I pointed out the three guy in lawyer suits, you all got represented, or actually served a petition by the preeminent law firm in the state of Texas. These are the number one mud creator. So to the judge's point, not sure what they thought they had to give up, if anything. The next chart is an image of the Blanco County number one. You've seen this before, I think. I just rotated the image so it's easier to see. But the point to take away is the amount of infrastructure to be built. That's $50 million worth of bonds that the people in that boundary are going to have to pay off. You probably know about the density, 385 acres, 1,094 lots with commercial lots and parking lots. So high density, small acreage, and a mixed development of commercial, residential lots. Next chart is development agreement, City of Bernie and WCID number 3. This is a spreadsheet of how the City of Bernie negotiated another WCID and what the developer and the city agreed would be good for both. The left-hand side of the chart, you'll notice there's roadway and mobility concessions, water and environmental, term of annexation, land for a school, natural gas service, and wastewater treatment service. And I just point that out. This is what a development agreement should get to in the end, but it takes time. This big agreement took better part of a year to negotiate. Next chart, evaluating special districts disadvantages. A lot of this stuff you may have heard in various conversations, but it's extremely pertinent to what's happening in the Hill Country, especially Blanco, because this focuses on the groundwater availability. I have no idea where the water for either the Johnson Ranch WCID or the mud for the city of Blanco will come from. Next chart, Kendall County wells. Just a comparison, I'm getting down to the end here. In 1940, we had 395 wells registered. Most recent count is over 8,500 wells. I do not know what the situation in Blanco County is. And last slide, just to summarize, we talked about very quickly, and I'm sorry for the choppy presentation, but what's a mud WCID? We've talked about how they're created, address the public notice or lack of public notice, quick Kendall County experience, and then lastly, water concerns. So I would point out from what I've seen and what I think you see in this presentation, the number one issue is lack of transparency. And that concludes what I have to say. Again, I hope that Cliff can get these posted where you can look at them and study them. I've laid them out as simply as possible. There are a number of backup charts you may find useful. And that's all I have at this time. And again, I sincerely apologize for the delay and not being able to do this face to face. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Milan. And let's jump right into question and answer. I've got quite a few here on the table in front of me. I'm going to ask Cliff to be managing and reading questions from our online Q&A function. So I would encourage you, if you have a question, submit it. Feel free, folks. I know we're out of time, so if anyone needs to get up, we completely understand, but we do want to carve some time out to take these questions. Milan, the first question I have is around the water related to this particular mud, and in your experience, what role or authority does the local groundwater conservation district play in this conversation, if any? I wonder if you could speak to that as a member of the Cow Creek Groundwater Conservation District.
If the water is supplied by wells, a conservation district would have authority over the permit for the wells. If the source is surface water, like say Canyon Reservoir, then the district has no authority over the water issue. And that's what happens in Kendall County. The last 5 districts that have been created have all brought out of county water. There are no wells to support these districts because there's not enough in Kendall County. So our district has not been directly involved in the MUDs or WCIDs because groundwater is not used.
Catherine, do you want to ask another?
Why don't you go ahead, Cliff, and make sure you really speak up.
Sure thing. We have a question here that is, we have several questions about what kinds of regulations development within a MUD. In this case, folks are pointedly asking about MUD number 1, but to the extent that we can generalize, that might be useful as well, since there are other MUDs and special districts likely to come to Blanco County. So the question is, to what extent are MUDs, in this case in the ETJ of a city, subject to development regulations coming from the city and coming from the county? In other words, what role does the county have to play, and what role can the city play in ensuring that best practices are adopted within the MUD? Best practices might include anything from low impact development for stormwater, night sky lighting, rainwater harvesting, etc.
I would tell you from my experience, in a development like this, a special district in the ETJ, the county has no authority. Then we fall back to the city's involvement in making a development agreement that is mutually compatible with both entities, because the end game is to annex this property into the city. So then the infrastructure should be constructed to the city's specifications. And frankly, I don't know how you do that unless you have a development agreement.
Thanks, Milan. So to summarize, what I've heard from Milan here is that the county, if the city is in the ETJ, the county may not have any authority. I would imagine that would really depend. Milan, speaking from his experience in Kendall County, I would imagine that would depend on the interlocal agreements between the county and, in this case, the city of Blanco, and how the ETJ is governed. And then Milan also emphasized the importance of a development agreement, which is, outside the form of regulations, but you can get to the same end. If the city has something the MUD wants, then they can say, well, let's talk. And then they can impose some regulation-like stipulations in that agreement. Lauren, I saw you trying to get a word in, please.
I was really going to say what you just said, Cliff, which was the county may have some jurisdiction. It just kind of depends on the agreement that they have with the city on how it governs the ETJ. But surely if there is a development agreement, that is essentially like a contract between the city and the developer. And that's why that is so important, because it will be, or it has the potential to be comprehensive and to address, the maybe very site-specific concerns that the city or its residents have with this particular development. So, and since we've been talking about the fact that the city has, what it sounds like the developer wants in this case, although it's still, I think, a little unclear, it's a little early. The city has the water or the wastewater that the developer might be asking for. Then, or maybe they don't have it, but that's what the developer wants. I should say it that way. That is kind of the carrot that Judge Cahoon was referring to earlier in negotiating, benefits to the city at the same time.
Great. I might jump in with the next question if y'all don't mind. We have 2 questions here about revenue from this new MUD. And the first question is, Will the city of Blanco receive any revenue from the MUD, given that it's in the ETJ and not in the city limits? And then related to that question is, how will the city pay for the additional services that will be needed in terms of fire, EMS, school teachers, public resources within the city? So any thoughts on that, Milan or Lauren? And I'm sorry, Councilmember Devine, any additions?
Well, my understanding at this point is all of that is part of the development agreement. And, you know, we're not going to get something we don't ask for. I know that. So we need to look closely to see, you know, what it is we ask for, not just in water infrastructure, but in, you know, the stress that this is going to cause for our police and our EMS and all of the other services, our roads. We need to be sure that we ask for all of those things in the development agreement as that process continues.
Yeah,
Anyone else?
I would make a
I
point.
emphasize what Judge Cahoon said when she talked about negotiating a development agreement with a group, an entity called Esperanza. They brought 1,200 acre feet to the table from City of Bernie to trade. City of Bernie said, hey, we need a new wastewater treatment plant. So the developer and the city partnered to build a brand new water treatment and recycling center. And the end result was that the people that used the sewer in Esperanza sent it to the City of Bernie's state-of-the-art processing plant. And the City of Bernie returned back to their property purple pipes so they can irrigate their lawns with treated wastewater, type 1 wastewater. That's a really good example of how a city and a district like a WCID or MUD can work together to get the same thing. The same thing is that Bernie has a water shortage at peak demand. So a 1,200 acre development with 2,400 homes on it that uses exclusively treated wastewater to irrigate their properties significantly reduces the drinking water requirement that the City of Bernie would provide by the development agreement.
Thanks, Milan. Lauren?
That's a really good point, Milan. I'm glad you pointed that out. I was going to say that I think there's an opportunity to be creative with development agreements too. And with regard to the city's tax base, you know, I saw Milan mention that there was some commercial development proposed, and I think that commercial development would fall inside the ETJ. And so that would be for as one example of a way to increase the city's tax revenue. That could be something that's on a limited purpose annexation agreement, for example, that allow the city to collect sales tax from that commercial development or something like that. So I'm just pointing out one example of different ways that the city could agree to something with the developer.
Thanks, Lauren. We have a question for Councilmember Devine. What is the discussion, if any, around future annexation for this MUD, number one?
What is the discussion, if any, around future annexation of this MUD into the city of Blanco?
Well, you know, again, we just did the initial step. So the development agreement, we haven't begun the process of creating a development agreement, but my understanding is basically that annexation will happen, but not until their bonds are paid off. So we want to kind of be sure in there that the city isn't left holding the bag for bonds that the MUD creates. That's my understanding at this point.
Those bonds were $50 million, is that what?
That's what I heard. Yeah.
Milan or Lauren, can you all speak to how this has worked in other instances? I know we heard from the judge that the Esperanza development is being phased into the city of Bernie over time. Is that correct, Milan?
Did we lose him?
It looks like maybe
I apologize. 1 second. We had a technical. Milan, can you repeat your answer again?
Yes, as part of the development agreement, the city would not annex that 1,200 acres, 2,400 homes, until 15 years after the first home was built. And at that point in time, it was assumed that all the bonds would be paid off. The city would not be very wise to take on a district like that's debt when they have the wherewithal to pay it by property taxing their residents in their boundaries.
Were you all able to hear Milan?
Y'all get that?
Can you repeat the answer, Cliff?
Yeah, that they had an agreement that the city would not annex the subdivision until at least 15 years after the first home was sold, on the thinking that the bonds would be paid off at that point. And then Milan reiterated that it wouldn't be wise for a community to annex MUD or special district before the bonds are paid off and to assume that debt.
And I would
Great.
say that that's pretty typical. And it also is, I think, speaks to the need for communities to plan ultimately for annexation to occur and to know that that's going to become part of the city limits. And 15 years is not that far away, but it's far enough that maybe the people who are in office now won't be, holding those seats in the future. So there's a real need for the community to be involved in that planning.
I have another question here for Councilmember Devine. Does the city plan to develop a MUD ordinance before negotiating a development agreement with MUD number 1?
Yes. There is a MUD ordinance, certainly at least a draft ordinance being created right now. And I hope to have that on the next agenda, if not in April, in May, so that will be in place. It may be something that we'll need to amend, but I want to at least get a draft ordinance in place so that we can start this process of really protecting ourselves as a city and being able to, be in a position to ask for things that are going to benefit the city if we're going to have this community come in. So, yes.
And if it wasn't clear from Milan's presentation, we know about this MUD that's been proposed for just south of the city of Blanco. We had a map of the Mathews Ranch WCID. That is a second development that's coming in a little bit closer to Johnson City. That was the map that Milan kind of pointed out. It's very hard to tell where exactly that project is proposed based on what information they are required to provide for public notice. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. Maybe Councilmember Devine, I'd love to hear if the city has talked about or considered these sorts of things, and then hear from Lauren and Milan if you have seen this type of negotiation happen in other MUDs or WCIDs. But got some question about impacts to downstream neighbors, if this MUD is going to have any requirement that it consider flood mitigation as part of its development, as well as any control over density and or green space, parks, open space, those sorts of amenities. Are those things that the city can influence? And Cliff, you're on mute. I'm not sure if Milan is responding.
He wasn't. Milan, did you hear the question?
What I heard, I would say that unless the MUD or WCID is in the ETJ of the city, there's not much that can be done outside of that boundary, other than just the normal water considerations from TCEQ. So not much to try to have to try to enforce that.
So
if you could repeat his answer, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Milan said that that outside of the ETJ, there's really not much that the city can do But of course, I'll add myself that there's the development agreement approach, and the development agreement is it's a negotiation that in which, you know, both parties can put anything on the table that they want to put on the table. So to the extent that that the city has both the information that they need to know what to ask for when it comes to the concerns, Catherine, that the question raised, as long as the city has that information, then they can bring that into the negotiation. Similar.
Lauren,
Go ahead, Catherine.
I was going to ask Lauren a direct question about this issue of transparency and getting information from the developer of the MUD. Do you have any insight into ways that the community can contact the MUD, contact the developers to get more detailed information?
Oh, sorry. That is a good question. So the city council in their negotiations has that leverage. And so I do think that that is a reason why the negotiations themselves should be something that's a part of a public process in the community, so that the city has the ability to hear from residents who say, we want this information to be made public, we want a hearing. And so there's that component. There's also the component of if the developer applies to the TCQ, petitions to the TCQ, then anything they submit to the TCQ would be something you could get from them, from that agency through a public information request. And I also think that there's probably more that could be done that's not really that common maybe, or is not being explored. And so sort of how the MUDs themselves, like or an issue that cities negotiate, because I think what Milan was pointing to earlier is that these MUDs are set up by developers. Developers often set up who the initial sort of elected board members are going to be. And then people oftentimes that move into MUDs don't even realize that they live inside of one, and that there is a board that's supposedly a public body that that is subject to the Public Information Act and that has to post meetings publicly. And so the more that the city can require of a MUD to do or provide sort of in the way that they set up and get going in the first place, then the more transparency that can be provided down the line. But right now I acknowledge that that it's a big challenge to get information from a MUD that's sort of got consent, but is not formed yet as a public entity. Sorry, I think my internet cut out for a minute, so I'm sorry if I missed anything.
No, we heard you great. Your video froze momentarily, but we heard everything. Thanks.
I have a few questions here from the internet that pertain to what will be developed and the timeline for that. So one question is, how long will it be before homes start to be built? And of course, we may not know, but this is the question. How long will it be before homes start to be built? And then other questions get at, do we have any insight into what kinds of commercial development are being considered for the commercial areas of the property? Specifically mentioned in some of the questions is an HEB. And I don't know if they were saying they were for or against an HEB, but they asked about an HEB, and an emergency clinic that's open 24/7. So if anybody, most likely you, I would guess, council member, has insight into what kinds of plans or timeline has been hinted at, this would be a good time to hear that.
Nobody has hinted at any plans to me. I mean, I saw the same slide everyone else saw that Milan put up, that supposedly there's 8 commercial lots being developed, and I don't know what that means. Does that mean an HEB, a Walmart, a Target, and a Home Depot? I don't know. I think, again, hopefully this is something that public input will have some bearing on, when we get into the process of the development agreement. And, my understanding from what the judge was saying was that that was a period of 8 years before that was completely built out. So we've got a long process in front of us. I don't know, I mean, we haven't even gotten to the development agreement yet, so I don't see any houses being built anytime really soon. It's going to be a long process to develop this agreement.
I couldn't hear very well. Did you say the development contract a public document?
The development agreement, did he say that?
Question from the audience here is the development agreement a public document? Lauren, do you?
Our experience,
Go ahead, Milan.
Yes.
it was conducted the full public view.
Milan broke up there, but I think that the answer to the question is yes. The development agreement is a public document.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that there has to be some public notice, public process for input, doesn't there? Or, I mean, we can certainly ask for that.
Yeah, there is some state law that governs development agreements, but yes, they are public documents.
So they're public documents and there will need to be public input.
Question, we have a question here that pertains to the Bernie experience. Milan, you may be able to speak to this. The question is, what kind of surcharge did the city charge for water and wastewater services from the MUD? In other words, are folks in the MUD paying the same amount for water and wastewater as everybody else in this who's getting those services from the city, or do they pay an additional fee as part of an agreement?
That's $5. The agreement was that the developer would bring 1,200 acre feet of water that they had reserved from Canyon Reservoir and gave that to the city of Bernie. In return, the city of Bernie uses their water system to put drinking water into Esperanza. So I don't think there was any difference in the rate.
Thank you. Were you all able to hear that, Captain?
Yeah, everyone hear that okay? It sounds like they're paying the same rate as existing customers for that water. I want to ask a couple of questions related to water and wastewater service. It sounds like we haven't heard yet what the developer is asking, but we had a couple of questions about, is there enough water available to supply this MUD, given that they would be upstream, so to speak, on the Canyon water supply line? They would be upstream from the city of Blanco. It's my understanding that the city is working on both their water and wastewater infrastructure currently. So the other question is, does the city of Blanco have the capacity to handle the sewage that may come from this MUD? And council member, I don't know if you have the answers to those or.
I do not have the answers to those. I have an opinion about that. I think it would be challenging. Just given the aquifer that we're on, I think it's going to be a challenge to be able to supply the water. And it is a concern of mine that this MUD will sit between our backup water source, which is Canyon Lake. Right now, it's our primary source while we're redoing our water treatment plant. But they're our backup source, and this MUD will sit between Canyon Lake and the city of Blanco. So if there ends up being a shortage, the city of Blanco is on the short end of that. It's a consideration. Again, we don't have these specifics yet, so I think it's certainly, there's a good argument for maybe bringing that density down to be more reasonable with what our water is able to support.
Lauren, I wonder if you could speak to, you mentioned briefly the other TCEQ permits. If the MUD is treating its own wastewater, what does that permitting process look like?
Yeah, so if the MUD decides not to, for whatever reason, hook up to the city's system, and I liked what Milan pointed out earlier regarding the purple pipes and the ability of the city to control the wastewater, but maybe not be obligated to dispose of all of it and have a place to reuse the effluent for irrigation instead on the MUD zone property. But if that sort of a scenario proved untenable, then the MUD would be looking at a situation where they would have to go as a development and get their own permit from the TCQ to either land apply or discharge their own wastewater that those homes and even maybe the commercial developments produce. And depending on when and how they did that, they'd probably have to rework their plan a little bit, because I didn't see any property on their preliminary plat that would be devoted to that kind of infrastructure. And so you just have to wait and see, but they would essentially submit an application with like a justification for the need to the TCQ for a certain amount of wastewater capacity and treatment and a disposal method. And with that, they would have to provide notice to landowners in the vicinity, and then there would be a public comment period that would be open for, at least a period of 30 days, in which people could comment, request a public meeting, and that would be something that would, that would all be available to the public, hopefully there in Blanco, and then there would be an opportunity to request a contested case hearing on that, which is like a civil trial essentially. So that would be a whole nother process that they also probably would like to avoid if possible. And that's another, I think, carrot that maybe the city has to offer.
All right, Cliff, I want to see if you have one or two more questions to kind of close us out. And then, yeah, let's have just a few closing comments about logistics, about sharing resources and materials moving forward.
Sure. Two questions. I'll just put them both out there and let y'all take them. So the first is really pointed to Councilmember Devine. The question is, will the city of Blanco negotiate to reduce the number of homes per acre? Of course, I would potentially reframe that as, will the city of Blanco try to negotiate to reduce the number of homes per acre? And then the question goes on to point out some of the benefits: maintaining the charm of Blanco, reducing water usage, and reducing both stormwater and wastewater. And additionally, will the city try to negotiate that the MUD have recreational amenities and more green space? So both reducing the density, the number of homes, and increasing the number of recreational amenities and the amount of green space.
Yes.
Thank you. The other question, I think the other question is to everyone on the panel, and this is maybe a good one to end on. Milan had noted in his slides that that the key issue, the primary concern with special districts is transparency. And of course, we know that water is such a key issue and there are so many others, but transparency helps unlock all of those issues and our access to really pursue our community's best interests, which we cannot do without transparency. So the question is just simply, besides what's been said already, is there anything else that anyone on the panel would like to add for what the city and citizens of the county can do to help improve transparency in the process and ensure transparency in the process?
I would like to comment.
Go ahead, Milan.
I would make an observation that transparency is also an opportunity for the public to look for what is not transparent. So I'm trying to get at it. The original part of my presentation was to remind everybody everything I presented was in the public domain. It was accessible through Public Information Act. It was accessible by attending city council meetings. It was reviewing minutes of those meetings. All the information you saw and tons more is available in the public domain. You just got to look for it.
So Milan's point there is to be tenacious and to look for that there's a lot of information in the public domain about what is happening, where the mud might be in the development process or in its own creation process, what kinds of agreements have been achieved in other communities, so that there's a lot of information to go after, and it does take some work to track it down, but that it's worth doing. Lauren or Councilmember Devine, do you want to add anything to the transparency question?
Not really. I think that, you know, what I've learned from speaking with Milan is that public participation is key in examples that, and maybe he can go into this a little bit, but there was a development that the developer ended up reducing the density by a considerable amount. And when I asked Milan, you know, why would they do that? How did that happen? How did they get this development to come down, you know, really from, he can say, but I think it was from 900 and something units to 300 and something. And he said public outcry. So I'm thankful so many people came to this. I hope we can do this again for people that maybe weren't able to make it tonight and really keep this conversation open. But I appreciate everybody who came to participate, and just keep that in mind. It's gonna require us, you know, public outcry is what brought that development down from 900 and something to 300 and something. So get ready to outcry.
So Cliff, this is Ann, and I wanted to chime in that we've got a lot of great folks who are on the Zoom call, from City of Blanco elected officials to people who are running for office, to some groundwater folks, and lots of attendees from the Protect Our Blanco and Hill Country Alliance board. So I can't thank everybody enough for all of their support on this event, and hope that we can do like Dita just said. I think that this is the start of the conversation, and maybe the next one won't have so many technology challenges.
Yeah, I want to extend our gratitude on behalf of the Hill Country Alliance to our panelists. Thank you all for working with us through technological difficulties. Thank you for all that tuned in, both online and in person. I had a question about making the slides available. We will absolutely make the slides available on both the Hill Country Alliance website as well as the Protect Our Blanco website. I also had someone ask specifically about printed copies of the slides. I would be happy to run some printed copies. So if that was you that submitted that question, come talk to me afterwards so I can drop them in the mail to you. Cliff, any other closing comments or housekeeping?
No, I just want to say thanks everybody for showing up. Thanks for taking this issue seriously. We know how serious it is for your community and for Blanco County at large. And thanks to the panelists for sharing their insights.
Great. I saw some very rich discussion just as it was popping up on the screen behind me in the chat. And so maybe Ann, if you don't mind making sure that we save the chat and the question and answer, I will save what I have in front of me, and we will do our best to, for those questions that did not get answered or posed tonight, also put those on both HCA's website as well as Protect Our Blancos. So with that,
Happy to do that.
Great. Thank you all so much. I'm happy to hang around and chat with those who are here, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you.
And I'm going to end the video for everybody. So again, thank you for everybody's participation. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.